Ever felt like someone was inside your head, twisting your thoughts, making you doubt your own reality while smiling as if they cared? That's the chilling power of the demonic mind games narcissists use against empaths. They don't just argue or manipulate, they crawl into your emotions, plant confusion, and feed off your compassion until you're left questioning who you really are. But here's the truth. Once you learn to see their tactics for what they are, the spell breaks. You no longer become their puppet. You become untouchable. In this video, we're going to expose these dark games one by one, and by the end, you'll know exactly how to shield yourself so you're never manipulated again. And before we dive in, I want you to do something powerful. If any part of this message stirs something inside you, subscribe and comment below, not just to support, but to declare that from this moment on, you choose freedom over manipulation. Because once you speak it out loud, the healing begins. Narcissists are not always the loud, arrogant, and boastful people we imagine them to be. Their most dangerous weapon is not their charm or their anger. It is their ability to step into your mind and rearrange your reality without you even noticing. Think of them as puppeteers, pulling invisible strings while you believe you are moving freely. This is the dark psychology of narcissists. They operate in ways that bypass logic and appeal directly to your emotions. For empaths, this becomes even more dangerous because empaths are wired to feel deeply, to understand others' pain, and to give second chances. That beautiful sensitivity becomes the very thing narcissists exploit. They read it like an open book and turn it against you. They know exactly when to praise you, when to withdraw, when to play the victim, and when to attack. All of this is done not by accident, but with a cold, calculated purpose: to control. Their manipulation isn't always visible. In fact, the more invisible it becomes, the more powerful it becomes. When you first meet a narcissist, you might feel a strange pull toward them. They have a way of making you feel seen, as if they understand you better than anyone else. This is not genuine connection. It is bait. They observe you carefully, listening for your values, your hopes, and your fears. Then, like a mirror, they reflect it back to you. If you value kindness, they exaggerate their kindness. If you long for stability, they paint themselves as your safe place. If you're proud of your empathy, they call themselves empathic too. But beneath this reflection lies emptiness. What you are really connecting with is not them, but your own desires projected back at you. This is the first string they tie to your heart. Once that connection is established, the game deepens. They begin testing boundaries, not in obvious ways, but in subtle ones. A backhanded compliment here, a dismissive tone there, a small contradiction that leaves you questioning yourself. Empaths often brush it off, thinking maybe they didn't mean it that way, because empaths naturally want to see the good in people. But this is where the psychology of control begins. The narcissist is not looking for forgiveness in those moments. They are looking for confirmation that you will bend. Every time you excuse the behavior, every time you silence your intuition, the narcissist learns exactly how far they can push without losing you. What makes this manipulation so powerful is that it doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like love. It feels like passion. It feels like connection. They shower you with affection after hurting you. And the human brain, especially the empathic one, begins to associate pain with reward. This cycle, often called trauma bonding, is one of the darkest psychological traps they set. The push and pull creates an addictive loop. The highs feel euphoric and the lows feel devastating. Empaths tell themselves, if I can just love them harder, maybe it will go back to how it was in the beginning. But that beginning was only a mask. The narcissist knows this. They are always aware of what they are doing.
Their psychology is not accidental. It is intentional. They pull your strings with precision. They silence you with guilt, making you feel selfish if you speak up. They twist your words until you start apologizing for things you never did. They create chaos so that your mind is too busy trying to make sense of it to notice the bigger picture. And while you're untangling confusion, they're in control. This is how their darkness works, not by force, but by tricking you into surrendering your power. Empaths in particular are vulnerable because they often believe they can heal the narcissist. The empath's heart whispers, "They are broken, and I can fix them with enough patience and love." But here is the painful truth. Narcissists do not want to be fixed. They are not broken in the way empaths imagine. Their darkness is not a wound they want healed. It is a strategy they use for survival and dominance. To them, vulnerability is weakness, and love is a tool. They will take your compassion, your forgiveness, and your patience, and they will sharpen those gifts into weapons to use against you. Another part of this dark psychology is projection. Whenever they feel shame or fear of exposure, they throw it onto you. If they lie, they accuse you of dishonesty. If they manipulate, they claim you are the manipulator. This tactic is so confusing because it forces the empath to defend themselves against false charges, while the narcissist quietly slips away from accountability. Imagine a magician distracting the audience with one hand while hiding the trick with the other. That is projection. It keeps the empath spinning in self-doubt while the narcissist continues pulling the strings unseen. Perhaps the most sinister aspect of this psychology is how it isolates the empath from their own inner voice. Over time, the empath stops trusting their instincts. They begin to second-guess everything. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I imagined it. This is not weakness on the empath's part. It is the design of the game. The narcissist thrives when you stop trusting yourself, because the less you trust your own mind, the more you rely on theirs. And the more you rely on them, the stronger their grip becomes. But here is the turning point. The moment you recognize this pattern, the spell weakens. The invisible strings become visible. You realize that the chaos, the guilt, and the doubt were never truly yours to carry. They were planted there, step by step, by someone who needed you disoriented in order to control you. Once you see that, you begin to reclaim your power. You stop dancing to their tune. You stop explaining yourself for things you didn't do. You stop believing that their silence, their rage, or their tears are your responsibility. The puppeteer can only control the puppet as long as the strings are invisible. Once they are exposed, the show is over.
Narcissists do not choose their victims at random. They are hunters, and like all hunters, they know exactly what kind of prey gives them the best chance of feeding their needs. Among all personality types, empaths stand out as the most vulnerable to their manipulative games. Why? Because empaths are wired with a rare sensitivity, a deep compassion, and a genuine desire to heal others. What is beautiful and sacred about the empath becomes a flashing signal to the narcissist, a sign that here is someone who can be bent, drained, and used without ever realizing it until the damage is already done. To understand this fully, we need to explore the psychology of both sides, the empath and the narcissist. Empaths move through life with an open heart. They are finely tuned to the emotions of others. When someone near them is hurting, they feel it almost as if it is their own pain. When someone is happy, they soak in that joy like sunlight. This gift allows them to build deep connections and to see beauty in the hidden corners of human experience.
But this very openness also leaves them without armor. They do not naturally expect deception or cruelty because their hearts are not built to deceive or destroy. They often assume others operate with the same sincerity they do. This is what makes them irresistible to narcissists. Narcissists, on the other hand, are driven by a constant hunger for attention, admiration, and control. Deep down, they are fragile, insecure, and terrified of being exposed for who they really are. To protect themselves, they build a false self, a mask that hides emptiness. But keeping that mask in place requires energy, and that energy must come from somewhere. This is where the empath comes in. Empaths are fountains of compassion. They forgive quickly, love deeply, and give endlessly. To a narcissist, being around an empath feels like stepping into a source of unlimited fuel. Every time the narcissist needs validation, the empath provides it. Every time the narcissist creates chaos, the empath works harder to bring peace. Every time the narcissist hurts them, the empath is quick to believe, maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe I can help them change. This cycle is exactly what the narcissist craves. The empath's belief in healing becomes one of their greatest vulnerabilities. Narcissists know how to present themselves as broken souls who just need love to be whole again. They spin stories of past trauma, neglect, or betrayal, painting themselves as misunderstood victims of the world. And the empath, with their soft heart, feels an irresistible pull to step in and mend the wounds. But here lies the cruel twist. Narcissists are not looking for healing. They are looking for supply. They will happily take the empath's love, energy, and sacrifice, but they have no intention of truly changing. The empath is left pouring themselves out like water into a bottomless cup, never realizing that no matter how much they give, it will never be enough. Another reason empaths are targeted is because they struggle with boundaries. To an empath, saying no often feels selfish or unkind. They would rather absorb discomfort themselves than cause pain to another. Narcissists exploit this weakness masterfully. They push, they demand, they manipulate, and the empath, not wanting to hurt anyone, bends. Each time they bend, they lose a piece of themselves. Over time, the empath may find they are living not for their own joy, but for the moods and demands of the narcissist. Their sensitivity becomes a leash in the narcissist's hand. But perhaps the most important reason empaths are prime targets is their tendency to see potential instead of reality. Empaths often look at people not for who they are today, but for who they could be tomorrow. They see the possibility of growth, healing, and transformation even in the darkest of hearts. Narcissists sense this and play into it. They give glimpses of change, moments of tenderness, flashes of vulnerability, just enough to convince the empath that the good person they hope for is real. These glimpses are like breadcrumbs leading the empath deeper into the trap. The empath convinces themselves, if I just stay a little longer, if I just love a little harder, they will finally become who I know they can be. But the narcissist has no interest in becoming that person. They are only interested in keeping the empath hooked. This dynamic becomes even more painful because empaths often measure their worth by how much they can help others. Their identity is tied to giving, nurturing, and healing. When a narcissist steps into their life, the empath interprets the chaos as a challenge. If I can fix this, if I can bring peace here, then I have truly fulfilled my purpose. The narcissist happily allows this illusion to continue because it ensures the empath stays locked in place, sacrificing themselves while the narcissist reaps the benefits. There's also a spiritual layer to this connection. Many empaths feel that their compassion is a calling, a sacred duty to bring light into darkness. Narcissists represent that darkness. The empath feels drawn to it, almost magnetically, because their spirit longs to transform suffering into healing. But what they fail to see is that not all darkness wants to be healed. Some darkness thrives on swallowing light, and narcissists thrive on the empath's light more than anyone else. They drink it, they hoard it, and they leave the empath drained, questioning why their love never seems to be enough. Yet within this painful truth lies an awakening. Once empaths understand why they are targeted, they can begin to see the pattern for what it is, not a reflection of their failure, but of their power. The reason narcissists target empaths is because empaths have what narcissists do not: genuine love, deep compassion, and authentic connection to others. These qualities are treasures, and the narcissist's envy drives them to steal and exploit them. When empaths learn to protect these treasures with boundaries, awareness, and self-respect, the game changes. The hunter loses their grip because the prey no longer plays the role they were assigned. So why are empaths the favorite targets? Because they are givers in a world full of takers. Because their compassion is endless, their forgiveness is generous, and their hope is unshakable. To a narcissist, that combination is irresistible. But to an awakened empath, it becomes unbreakable strength. The very qualities that once made them targets can become shields. Once they learn to channel their empathy wisely without sacrificing themselves, they become untouchable. And when that happens, the narcissist has no choice but to move on in search of another target, leaving the empowered empath standing tall, no longer prey, but a survivor who now understands the game. Gaslighting is one of the most insidious weapons in the narcissist's arsenal, and for empaths, it can be one of the most devastating. At its core, gaslighting is about twisting truth until it loses its shape, leaving the empath trapped in confusion, self-doubt, and even despair. Unlike open insults or visible cruelty, gaslighting works silently, like smoke filling a room. You don't see it at first. You just feel its effects: the disorientation, the dizziness, the constant questioning of your own mind. It begins with small, subtle contradictions. A narcissist says something cruel, and when the empath reacts, they quickly deny it. "I never said that. You must be imagining things." Or they might laugh it off. "Oh, you're too sensitive. It was just a joke." To the empath, who trusts their memory and intuition, this feels strange. They remember the words. They felt the sting. But
Narcissist speaks with such confidence that doubt begins to creep in. Maybe they are being too sensitive. Maybe they did misunderstand. That seed of doubt is all the narcissist needs. Gaslighting is not just about lying, it is about rewriting reality. Narcissists are masters at spinning stories that make them look innocent while painting the empath as irrational or unstable. If the empath notices a pattern of neglect or manipulation, the narcissist flips the script. You're imagining problems. You're overthinking. Nothing is wrong except the way you see things. The empath, who genuinely wants harmony and truth, starts questioning themselves instead of the narcissist. This reversal is intentional. By undermining the empath's trust in their own mind, the narcissist gains control. A person who no longer trusts their memory or intuition is far easier to manipulate because they begin to rely on the narcissist to define what is real. Over time, this tactic creates a haunting effect. The empath begins second-guessing even the simplest details. Did they really hear that insult? Did they misinterpret that cold silence? Were they wrong to feel hurt by that broken promise? Gaslighting creates a fog where nothing feels solid, and in that fog, the narcissist thrives. They hold the map. They become the only guide to what is true. Empaths, with their deep need to understand and their tendency to self-reflect, are especially vulnerable, because when confusion arises, their instinct is not to accuse, but to look inward. Maybe it's me. Maybe I need to be more patient, more forgiving, more understanding. This inward search, which normally makes empaths compassionate, becomes a trap when weaponized against them. One of the cruelest parts of gaslighting is how it isolates the empath from their support system. If the empath reaches out to friends or family about what's happening, the narcissist may already have planted seeds of doubt. They're overdramatic. They exaggerate. Don't take them too seriously. So when the empath finally speaks up, they may not be fully believed. That disbelief reinforces the gaslighting. The empath feels even more alone, even more convinced that maybe their perception really is broken. The narcissist, meanwhile, sits back in satisfaction, knowing their twisted version of reality is now the dominant one. Gaslighting doesn't always come in the form of direct denial. Sometimes it's disguised as care. The narcissist may say things like, "I'm just trying to help you. You don't see how unhealthy your thinking is. You should trust me more." On the surface, this sounds like concern, but underneath, it is another way of dismantling the empath's trust in themselves. When someone you love tells you that your mind can't be trusted, it cuts deeper than any insult. It makes you dependent on them to tell you what is real, and that dependency is the narcissist's ultimate goal. Over time, the empath may begin to feel like they are going crazy. Their intuition screams one thing, but the narcissist insists on another. Their memory holds on to events clearly, but the narcissist erases them with denial. This inner conflict wears down the empath's spirit. It creates exhaustion, anxiety, and sometimes even physical illness. The empath's natural gift of sensitivity, normally a strength, becomes overwhelming under the constant assault of confusion. Gaslighting doesn't just attack facts, it attacks identity. When you no longer trust your own perceptions, you lose touch with who you are. Yet, even in the middle of this fog, the truth never completely dies. Somewhere deep inside, empaths feel the tension. They may not be able to explain it in words, but they sense that something isn't right. The light of intuition flickers, even when the narcissist tries to snuff it out. And this is the key to breaking free. The first step is recognizing that the confusion is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of manipulation. The empath is not unstable. The empath is not imagining things. The empath is under attack, an invisible attack on their reality. Once this realization sinks in, the fog begins to clear. Breaking free from gaslighting requires reclaiming trust in oneself. It means keeping small anchors of truth, writing down events, trusting gut feelings, and refusing to accept someone else's version of reality when it contradicts a lived experience. It means remembering that empathy does not mean surrendering clarity. True compassion does not require sacrificing sanity. For empaths, this is the greatest challenge and the greatest victory, to love deeply while also standing firmly in truth. Gaslighting works because it convinces you to abandon yourself. The way to defeat it is to come home to yourself again, to honor your memory, to honor your feelings, to honor your intuition as valid, even if others deny it. When empaths reclaim that inner authority, the narcissist's grip crumbles. Their web of lies collapses under the weight of truth. The strings they pulled so carefully begin to snap one by one, and the empath, who once lost in the fog, emerges with a clarity stronger than ever before. In the end, gaslighting is not just about twisted words or false stories. It is about power. The power to control another person's mind by making them doubt their own. But once you see the game, you cannot unsee it. The illusion shatters, and the empath, who once seemed like the perfect target, becomes the one who holds the light. A light that no amount of darkness can extinguish. Silence, in its natural form, can be healing. It can bring peace, reflection, and rest. But in the hands of a narcissist, silence becomes something darker, a weapon, sharpened with intent, designed to wound without leaving visible scars. This is the silent treatment, one of the most chilling forms of psychological warfare they use against empaths. Unlike shouting, insults, or direct attacks, this method works by withdrawal, by absence, by deliberately denying the empath the basic human connection of acknowledgement. To the empath, who thrives on communication, understanding, and emotional closeness, this silence is not neutral. It is suffocating. It sends an unspoken message: you don't matter. Your feelings don't exist. I control when you are seen, and I control when you are invisible. The silent treatment often comes after the empath dares to express a need, set a boundary, or call out hurtful behavior. Instead of addressing the issue, the narcissist retreats into cold silence, withholding attention, affection, or even simple words. On the surface, it looks like distance, but beneath it lies a calculated intent to punish. The empath feels the weight of that silence pressing down, and because they are naturally sensitive, they begin searching for what they did wrong. Did I say something too harsh? Should I have been more gentle? Maybe I overreacted. The empath, desperate for connection and resolution, often reaches out first, apologizing, even when they were the ones wronged. And in that moment, the narcissist wins. The silence has bent the empath into submission without a single word being spoken.
The silent treatment also taps into the empath's greatest fear: abandonment. Empaths crave connection, and when someone they love withdraws, it triggers a deep sense of rejection. Narcissists exploit this fear mercilessly. They know that silence hurts the empath more than shouting ever could. Shouting can be dismissed as anger, but silence feels like disappearance, as if the empath no longer exists. This creates an internal panic. The empath may beg for communication, over-explain, or even take full responsibility for conflicts they didn't cause, all in the hope of ending the unbearable quiet. But this is exactly what the narcissist wants. The silence forces the empath to work harder, to give more, to bend further, while the narcissist simply waits. Sometimes the silent treatment is not complete absence, but selective silence. The narcissist may speak casually to others while ignoring the empath. They may answer practical questions with clipped responses, but avoid any emotional engagement. This selective silence is even more painful because it highlights the rejection. It says, "I can talk, I just choose not to talk to you." The empath, who interprets silence as distance, experiences it as a form of erasure. They begin to doubt their worth, thinking, if I were more lovable, if I were less demanding, maybe they wouldn't ignore me. The narcissist needs nothing more than to let the silence stretch on, because the empath is already doing the work of self-blame. Over time, the repeated use of silent treatment conditions the empath like a form of psychological training. The empath learns that speaking up leads to silence, that setting boundaries leads to withdrawal, that showing hurt leads to rejection. And so, slowly, they stop expressing needs altogether. They silence themselves before the narcissist can silence them. This is the deepest wound of all, when the empath begins to shrink their own voice to avoid punishment. The narcissist no longer even needs to enforce the control because the empath has internalized the lesson. My feelings don't matter. My voice doesn't deserve to be heard. But even in the middle of this dark tactic, there is truth waiting to be seen. The silent treatment says more about the narcissist than it does about the empath. It reveals that the narcissist fears accountability so much that they would rather retreat into emptiness than face the discomfort of being wrong. It shows that their control depends not on strength, but on avoidance. For the empath, recognizing this is the beginning of freedom. Silence no longer has to be interpreted as rejection. It can be recognized as manipulation. And once it is named, its power begins to dissolve. The key for empaths is to stop filling the silence with self-blame. Instead of asking, "What did I do wrong?" they can begin to ask, "Why do they need to use silence as a weapon?" That shift takes the focus off shame and places it back on truth. The empath can then learn to sit in the silence, without chasing, without apologizing, without begging for connection. This reversal is powerful because it turns the silence back on the narcissist. What was once a weapon becomes a mirror, reflecting their own emptiness back at them. The silent treatment is often called demonic because of how invisible yet destructive it is. It gnaws at the empath's spirit without leaving visible wounds. It convinces them to police their own emotions, to doubt their own worth, and to silence their own truth. But silence, once recognized, loses its sting. Empaths can reclaim it as their own, not as punishment, but as space to breathe, to reflect, to heal. The same silence that once enslaved them can become a sanctuary when they no longer allow it to control their mind. In the end, the silent treatment is a game of control played through absence. It works only as long as the empath believes that silence equals rejection and that rejection equals worthlessness. The moment the empath sees the tactic for what it is, manipulation, not truth, the power shifts. Silence becomes a choice, not a sentence. And in that choice, the empath rediscovers their voice. Love bombing is perhaps one of the most deceptive and dangerous tools in the narcissist's arsenal. And for empaths, it can feel almost impossible to resist. Imagine someone suddenly showering you with affection, attention, compliments, and promises that seem too good to be true. They text you constantly. They want to spend every moment with you. They call you their soulmate, their forever person, the one they've been waiting for. To an empath, who naturally craves connection and thrives on giving and receiving love, this feels like a dream finally coming true. But beneath the surface, hidden behind the sweetness, are fangs sharp enough to pierce the soul. Narcissists use love bombing not as an act of genuine affection, but as a bait in a carefully crafted trap. Their goal is not to love you, but to hook you, to create dependency, to make you feel that life without their constant presence would be empty and unbearable. At first, you feel high on the rush of it, the dopamine spike of attention, the intoxicating warmth of being seen and valued. But then the cracks begin to show. Their attention, once overwhelming, suddenly becomes scarce. The sweet words are replaced with subtle criticism. The long calls turn into cold silence. The constant praise transforms into disapproval. This is the cycle. They feed you love until you are addicted to the feeling, and then they pull it away, leaving you desperate to win it back. For empaths, this is devastating because their compassionate nature makes them fight harder, give more, sacrifice endlessly, believing that if they just love more purely, the sweetness will return. But that's the exact trap. The narcissist has conditioned them to chase what was never real in the first place. The soulmate connection was an illusion designed to disarm, to lower defenses, to make the empath ignore red flags that otherwise would have been obvious. Love bombing is not love at all. It is a weapon, a spell cast to weaken resistance, a performance to secure loyalty. And once the empath is locked in, the narcissist begins their next phase of control. The hidden fangs show themselves more clearly, and the empath realizes they are not being held in tender arms, but in a cage of manipulation. This is why it is so critical to understand love bombing for what it really is, not a sign of true devotion, but a tactic of domination. Real love grows slowly, with consistency, trust, and honesty. It does not rush, it does not overwhelm, and it certainly does not disappear the moment you need it most. The moment an empath learns to spot the pattern, the sudden intensity, the too perfect promises, the unnatural obsession, is the moment they can break free from the cycle. Because once you see the fangs behind the smile, the spell begins to lose its power. And instead of falling for the performance, you begin to reclaim your own worth, your own strength, and your own freedom. One of the most insidious weapons in the narcissist's arsenal is projection, a sinister trick where they hurl their own flaws, lies, and betrayals onto the empath, as though holding up a cracked mirror that reflects not the truth, but their own darkness. Imagine being accused of being selfish by someone who demands constant attention, or being called unfaithful by the very person who cannot remain loyal. For empaths, who naturally internalize emotions and question themselves, these accusations cut deeply. They begin to doubt their integrity, their loyalty, even their very character, because the person they care for insists it is so. And here lies the genius of the manipulation. The narcissist projects their sins onto the empath so convincingly that the empath takes on guilt that was never theirs to carry. Projection is not just deflection, it is a psychological curse that poisons the empath's self-image, leaving them burdened by shadows that belong to someone else. To break free, an empath must recognize that the mirror is cracked, that what is being reflected is not truth, but the narcissist's own hidden corruption.
There is perhaps no darker tactic in the narcissist's playbook than triangulation. A method so destructive, yet so carefully orchestrated, that it leaves even the strongest empath feeling like a puppet tangled in strings they cannot see. At its core, triangulation is about control, but not in a direct or obvious way. Instead of confronting the empath head-on, the narcissist slyly introduces a third party into the dynamic, whether it be another friend, a family member, an ex, or even a stranger, to stir emotions, ignite insecurities, and keep the empath off balance. Imagine being in what you thought was a close, intimate connection, only for the narcissist to suddenly highlight how someone else is more attractive, more intelligent, more supportive, or somehow superior. They might casually compare you to that person in a way that seems harmless on the surface, but beneath it lies a venomous intent: to make you feel inadequate, jealous, and desperate to regain the narcissist's validation. For the empath, who thrives on harmony and genuine connection, this manipulation is devastating because it creates a sense of rivalry where none should exist. The cruelty of triangulation is that it exploits the empath's compassion and loyalty, turning those very strengths into weaknesses. When the narcissist praises someone else in your presence, or worse, pits you against another person in a competition you never asked to join, you begin to question your own worth. You may think, "What am I lacking? Why am I not enough? What can I do to earn back their approval?" And this is exactly the trap the narcissist wants you to fall into. By planting seeds of insecurity, they gain power. They no longer have to lift you up, because now you are working tirelessly to prove yourself worthy of the very love and attention they are withholding. It is a silent war of the heart, one where the empath bleeds quietly while the narcissist smiles, feeding off the chaos they created. But triangulation goes beyond jealousy. It is also a clever way for narcissists to isolate their targets. By constantly creating rivalries, they fracture the empath's relationships with others. They may spread subtle lies, half-truths, or twisted versions of events to make the empath distrust people they once felt safe with. Or they may manipulate others to view the empath as needy, unstable, or difficult, creating an invisible wall between the empath and their support system. This ensures that the narcissist remains at the center of the empath's world, the one person they feel they must hold on to, even while being emotionally tormented. The empath, who once trusted their intuition, suddenly finds themselves unsure of who is genuine and who is not, unsure of whom to lean on, and unsure of their own reality. This isolation is not accidental. It is the narcissist's design, a way to keep their target trapped in a cage with invisible bars. What makes triangulation particularly destructive is its demonic subtlety. It doesn't always arrive in the form of obvious comparisons. Sometimes it appears in the narcissist's behavior, the lingering glance at someone else while you are right there, the secretive phone calls, the sudden stories about people they just happened to run into. These small acts, strung together, create an atmosphere of suspicion and unease. Other times, triangulation manifests in outright manipulation, where the narcissist deliberately tells you something someone else said, whether true or fabricated, to make you feel undermined, disliked, or betrayed. The empath is left spinning, trying to decipher who is being honest and who is playing games, while the narcissist sits back and enjoys the storm they brewed. For the empath, the internal damage of triangulation can be profound. Empaths naturally want peace, understanding, and genuine love. So when faced with these orchestrated rivalries, their first instinct is often to fix the situation. They may overextend themselves, trying harder to please the narcissist, trying harder to compete with the other person, or even sacrificing their own needs just to maintain the bond. But the cruel truth is that this is a race they can never win. The narcissist ensures that no matter how much the empath gives, there will always be someone else brought into the picture, someone else to measure against, someone else to make them feel less than. This cycle feeds the narcissist's ego endlessly as they bask in the power of watching people fight, ache, and unravel just to stay in their orbit. And yet, The darkest part of triangulation is not the jealousy it creates, it is the slow erosion of the empath's sense of self. Over time, the constant comparisons and rivalries chip away at their confidence, leaving them questioning if they are truly worthy of love at all. The empath begins to feel invisible, as though no matter what they do, they will never be enough. This is precisely the emotional prison the narcissist builds, a cage where the empath's wings are clipped and their once vibrant spirit is dimmed by the constant need to prove, to compete, and to endure. The narcissist thrives on this despair, feeding off the empath's desperation, while still dangling just enough hope to keep them tied to the game. Breaking free from triangulation requires one painful but liberating realization: that the problem was never you, and the rivalries were never real. They were illusions, carefully designed to destabilize and control. The other person was never the true enemy. The real enemy was the narcissist who orchestrated the entire charade. Once an empath sees this truth, the spell begins to break. The comparisons lose their power, the rivalries lose their sting, and the narcissist's control begins to crumble. But seeing this truth requires immense inner strength, because it means facing the reality that the love you thought was real was in fact a stage play filled with manipulation and deceit. In the end, triangulation is the narcissist's way of creating demonic rivalries, rivalries that should never have existed in the first place. It is psychological warfare disguised as love, intimacy, or friendship. For empaths, it is a painful journey to realize that they were never in competition with anyone else, but rather victims of a cruel manipulation designed to keep them insecure, isolated, and bound. But yet within that realization lies freedom. The freedom to step out of the twisted triangle, to reclaim self-worth, and to refuse to play a game that was never meant to be won. Because once the empath walks away, the narcissist's carefully constructed illusion shatters, and all that remains is their own darkness staring back at them. Narcissists are masters at disguising themselves, often wrapping their toxic behavior in the cloak of innocence. One of the most insidious tactics they use against empaths is the act of playing the victim. To the outside world, they appear fragile, misunderstood, or unfairly attacked. But beneath that mask lies a wolf in angel's clothing, carefully manipulating the compassion of the empath. Empaths, by nature, are drawn to help those who seem broken or in pain. This makes them the perfect audience for a narcissist's performance. The narcissist will exaggerate past traumas, invent betrayals, or twist small inconveniences into catastrophic injustices, all designed to trigger the empath's deepest instinct: to rescue, to comfort, and to heal. Once hooked, the empath pours their energy, time, and emotional strength into supporting the narcissist, believing they are helping a wounded soul. But in reality, they are being drained dry, while the narcissist avoids responsibility for their actions. Whenever the empath tries to confront the truth, the narcissist doubles down, crying louder, claiming persecution, and redirecting blame. It's a cycle of pity and guilt that keeps the empath trapped, always giving, while the narcissist takes without end. This weaponization of compassion is what makes the game so dark. It's not just manipulation, it's a deliberate attack on the
Emotional draining is perhaps the most insidious weapon in the narcissist's arsenal, because it operates silently and invisibly, like a slow poison dripping into the soul. To understand this tactic, you must first understand what empaths are at their core. They are natural givers, deeply sensitive to the emotional currents of others, often carrying a heart that feels the pain and joy of the world as if it were their own. For them, compassion is not a performance, it is a reflex. They step into a room and instantly absorb the unspoken tension, the subtle sadness, the quiet suffering of others, and instead of recoiling, they lean in, offering comfort, love, and presence. It is this very gift that narcissists identify and exploit. Narcissists do not see empathy as a sacred trait. They see it as fuel. They are like starving beings, hollow on the inside, forever in search of energy to fill the void of self that they cannot bear to face. And when they meet an empath, they see not a partner, but a power source. They begin the process of emotional draining by attaching themselves to the empath's sensitivity, knowing that every ounce of compassion given, every tear shed, every moment of joy shared, is something they can feed on. Narcissists thrive not only on the highs of an empath's happiness, but also on the depths of their suffering. When the empath is joyful, radiant, and full of light, the narcissist basks in that glow, siphoning it into themselves as though they created it. But when the empath is in pain, broken by manipulation or confusion, the narcissist feasts just as greedily, because in their twisted psychology, someone else's despair validates their power and control. It reassures them that they can dictate the emotional climate of another's life. Over time, this dynamic becomes a cycle. The empath unknowingly pumps out emotional energy, while the narcissist drinks it dry. The empath notices their exhaustion, but struggles to understand why, because on the surface, the narcissist often plays the role of a needy victim, someone who just needs more love or just had a hard life. And so the empath doubles down on their giving, offering more patience, more care, more sacrifice, not realizing that every act of compassion is being weaponized against them. This creates a devastating imbalance. The empath's spirit grows heavy, their light dimmer, while the narcissist appears strangely sustained, even energized. It is as if the empath is a candle being burned at both ends, illuminating everything around them while consuming themselves in the process. The tragedy is that empaths often confuse this draining for love. They believe that true love is selfless, that to heal someone is a noble purpose, and that enduring suffering is proof of devotion. The narcissist exploits this noble delusion, making the empath believe that giving endlessly is the price of intimacy. But the reality is darker. The narcissist has no intention of replenishing what they take. They are not a partner in balance. They are an energy vampire. They thrive in creating emotional storms, picking fights, sowing doubt, or manufacturing crises. Because every spike of emotion, whether joy or despair, produces fresh energy to feed on. They thrive on the empath's tears, their laughter, their compassion, their forgiveness. And with each cycle, the empath grows weaker, questioning why their soul feels empty despite giving so much love. This is the essence of emotional draining. It is theft of the most sacred resource a person possesses, their emotional life force. Unlike material theft, it cannot be replaced with time or money. What is stolen is vitality, trust, hope, and even the ability to believe in one's own perception. Many empaths, after years of this draining, describe themselves as shadows of who they once were, disconnected from their own joy, struggling to find meaning in their once vibrant compassion. That is the toll of being harvested by a narcissist. But here lies the awakening. Once the empath begins to recognize the pattern, the illusion begins to crack. They realize that love is not meant to leave them hollow, that compassion is not meant to be siphoned away, and that their energy is sacred. True connection should recharge both souls, not drain one dry for the survival of the other. The narcissist thrives only in darkness, where these truths are hidden. But once the empath shines a light on the pattern, the vampire loses its power, for it cannot survive without access to that emotional fuel. And so the lesson of emotional draining is not just about surviving narcissistic abuse. It is about reclaiming sovereignty over one's energy, learning that compassion without boundaries is self-destruction, and understanding that the gift of empathy must be protected. Because in the end, an empath's light is too precious to be wasted feeding the void of another's emptiness. It was meant to illuminate the world, not sustain the shadows. Breaking the spell begins with a shift in awareness, because the greatest weapon a narcissist holds is not their charm, not their silence, not even their manipulation. It is the blindness of the empath who does not yet see the game being played. Narcissists operate like illusionists, casting shadows to confuse, dazzling with false promises, and weaving webs of half-truths that make their targets doubt their own intuition. To recognize the game, an empath must first trust the quiet voice inside that whispers, "Something is not right." This inner compass, often buried beneath self-doubt and gaslighting, is the very tool that breaks the chains. The spell of narcissistic control thrives on confusion, so clarity becomes the antidote. Patterns reveal themselves when you step back. The cycles of love bombing followed by neglect, the sudden coldness after warmth, the way every conflict turns into your fault, no matter the situation. These repetitions are not random. They are signatures, fingerprints of manipulation. Once you learn to name them, the fog begins to lift. The blame you once carried so heavily on your shoulders starts to fall away, because you realize the problem was never your sensitivity, your love, or your willingness to forgive. It was their need for control. Breaking the spell also requires seeing through the mask of specialness that narcissists wrap their victims around. They make you believe you are chosen, the one person who understands them, the one who can heal their wounds. It feels intoxicating, almost like destiny. But this is the trap. By believing you are the only one who can save them, you surrender your boundaries. You excuse behaviors you would never tolerate from anyone else. You give endless chances because you believe their pain is unique, their struggle too deep for others to understand. But the truth is simple. If someone truly values you, they will not constantly break you down and expect you to rebuild yourself for the sake of their ego. Recognizing this false pedestal is like stepping out of a spell. Suddenly you see that their special story is recycled, told to many before you, and will be told to many after you. You are not chosen because of your worth to them. You are targeted because of your compassion, your willingness to give without demanding in return. That is what makes you prey in their eyes. Another step in breaking the spell is learning to separate love from control. Narcissists blur the lines, convincing you that jealousy is love, that criticism is care, that possession is devotion. They reframe toxic behavior as proof of passion, making you believe their intensity means they value you more. But true love does not suffocate, it nurtures. True care does not leave you questioning your value, it reminds you of it. When you can distinguish control from love, the chains start to loosen. You begin to see that their constant need to dominate your emotions, your choices, even your thoughts, is not an act of closeness, but of ownership. They are not holding you close because they love you. They are holding you tight because they fear losing control. Recognizing the game also means paying attention to your energy. Narcissists are masters at leaving their victims drained, exhausted, and hollow. They thrive on the emotional roller coaster, one moment lifting you high with affection, the next plunging you into despair with cruelty or silence. This up and down cycle is designed to keep you hooked, chasing the highs while fearing the lows. But when you pause and notice how often you feel tired, confused, or anxious around them, you see the truth. Love should not feel like survival. If being with someone feels like you are constantly walking on eggshells or sacrificing your peace just to keep the relationship alive, that is not love. It is control. Breaking the spell is not about fighting the narcissist head-on, because they will always twist your